Hi, fourth graders. I'm Mrs. Rooney, and I was so excited when Mrs. Taylor has asked me to join you in virtual learning. I am studying to be an elementary school teacher, and I'm not sure yet what grade I'm going to teach, but I am so excited, and these are good opportunities for me to observe students and watch Mrs. Taylor, what she does, because she's such a great teacher, and I'm going to learn so much from her, and I'm going to learn so much from you. So thank you for letting me join you. I will be with you through for most part of the spring. So starting now through the holidays and after the holidays for quite some time. One of the things you need to know about me is that I love to read. When I'm not studying, because studying always comes first, I have my nose in a book. I have stacks of books sitting around my house, and I have a couple books going at once. So one of the things I'm going to share with you today is I'm going to share one of my favorite children's books. And the author is Chris Van Allsburg. And you might recognize his name, but I know you'll recognize some popular titles of stories he's written. One of them is The Polar Express and Jumanji and Zathura. Those are some of the popular ones that I'll share with you. Chris Van Allsburg is one of my favorite authors because of his illustrations. He always has a great adventurous story, as you know, if you've read some of his books. But his illustrations have a lot of movement. And this particular story that I'm going to read to you is called The Widow's Broom. And it's a perfect seasonal book because it's fall and it's getting darker outside and the leaves are on the ground and it's getting a little bit cold and we're getting excited about being out and about. And Halloween is always a fun time of the year. So The Widow's Broom, Chris Van Allsburg, when he drew these illustrations, there's a lot of emotion in his drawings, meaning that he adds a little bit of a mood or mystery, and it gives you a little bit of a fall feeling. And you'll see that when I read this story. So there's a couple things I need you to think about. So when he drew his illustrations, he used a special board and he put it underneath his paper. And on this board, there's little tiny dimples. And he used a litho pencil, which just means a darker pencil. And when he drew across the paper with the board underneath, because it had those little dimples, it looks, when you look close to it on his illustration pages, it looks like there's tiny little dots that make up his pictures. And I'll show you a couple of those pictures up close when I'm done reading because it's really cool to look at. And another thing you need to know about Chris Van Allsburg is that he draws one object in every single one of his books. So I want you to be on the lookout in the illustrations of one object that you think, or you might even recognize from reading The Polar Express or Jumanji. And I know that now his books have been made into motion pictures, and so there's movies, and so this object is in his movies as well, and you might know right off the bat. And I'll reveal that when the story's over. And one last thing is that what I've learned about Chris Van Allsburg in this book is that he uses anthropomorphism. And that is such a fun word to say, anthropomorphism. What anthropomorphism is when you take an ordinary object and you change it into something real. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to change this pencil and I'm going to pretend that I can change it into something real. And wouldn't that be cool? Because what I would want the pencil to do is to write a paragraph for me or to take notes or, oh yeah, pencil, I'm out of milk. Will you write that on the grocery list? That would be really fun. So anthropomorphism is when you take an ordinary object and you turn it into something real. And of course, it's fantasy. But Chris Van Allsburg in this book changes an object into something real and in his story. And I want you to keep a lookout for that. So I will begin reading The Widow's Broom by Chris Van Allsburg. Witches' brooms don't last forever. They grow old, and even the best of them one day lose the power of flight. Fortunately, this does not happen in an instant. A witch can feel the strength slowly leaving her broom. The sudden bursts of energy that once carried her quickly into the sky become weak. Longer and longer running starts are needed for takeoff. Speedy brooms that, in their youth, outraced hawks are passed by slow-flying geese. When these things happen, a witch knows it's time to put her old broom aside and have a new one made. One very rare occasion, however, a broom can lose its power without warning and fall with its passenger to the earth below, which is just what happened one cold autumn night many years ago. Out of a moonlit sky, a dark, cloaked figure came spinning to the ground. The witch, along with her tired broom, landed beside a small white farmhouse, the home of a lonely widow named Minna Shaw. At daybreak, Widow Shaw discovered the witch lying in her vegetable garden. She was bruised and bloody and couldn't stand up on her own. In spite of her fear, and because she was a kind woman, Minna Shaw helped the witch inside and put her to bed. The witch asked Minna Shaw to draw the curtains, then wrapped herself tightly in the black cape and fell soundly asleep. She lay there perfectly still all day and all evening. When she finally awoke at midnight, her wounds had completely healed. She rose from the bed and moved silently through the widow's house. Minna Shaw was asleep in a chair by the fireplace, where embers of a dying fire glowed on the hearth. The witch knelt and took one of the red-hot coals in her hand. Outside, she made a fire of leaves and twigs, then dropped a strand of her hair into the flame. The fire hissed and crackled, burning with a brilliant blue light. And before long, the witch could see a dark form flying overhead. It was another witch, who circled slowly and landed beside the fire. The two women spoke briefly, the first witch gesturing toward the garden where her old broom rested. Then they sat side by side on the second witch's broom and flew off over the treetops. When Minna Shaw woke up, she wasn't surprised to find that her guest had gone. Witches, she knew, had unusual powers. It didn't surprise her either when she saw that the old broom had been left behind. The widow guessed it had lost its magic. It was an ordinary broom now, just like the one she kept in the kitchen. She began using it around the house and found that it was no better or worse than the broom she'd used before. One morning, Minna Shaw was still in bed when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen. She peeked in and saw something that made her heart jump. There was the broom, sweeping the floor all by itself. It stopped for a moment and turned to the widow, then went back to work. At first, Minna was frightened, but the broom seemed harmless, and what's more, it was doing a very good job. Unfortunately, it swept all day long. In the evening, to get some peace, she locked the broom in a closet, But when it tapped on the door for more than an hour, Minna felt guilty and let it out. As she lay in bed listening to the broom, sweeping each room over and over, she wondered if it couldn't learn to do some other things. In the morning, she led the broom outside and found out that it was a very good student. She needed to show it how to do something only once. Soon the broom could chop wood and fetch water, feed the chickens, and bring the cow in from pasture. It could even pick out simple tunes on the piano. Not a week passed before the widow's neighbors, the Spiveys, found out about the broom. Their farm was just down the road, the only other place around. It was one of the 8 Spivey children who saw the broom first. When the boy told his father, Mr. Spivey ran straight across the road to the widow's house. "Is it true?" he demanded. Did she really have such a broom? "Oh, yes," Minna Shaw answered. "It's wonderful." She told her neighbors all about the broom and the witch who'd left it behind. Then she took them around to the back of the house where the broom was hard at work splitting wood. Mr. Spivey was horrified. "This is a wicked, wicked thing," he said. "This is the devil." The broom stopped working and, still clutching the axe, hopped toward the widow and her neighbor. Mr. Spivey, red-faced and angry, turned quickly and hurried home. Soon, more distant neighbors heard about the broom and visited the widow's farm. The men who saw it seemed to agree it probably was a wicked thing. But their wives pointed out that it was a great help to the widow and could play the piano well, considering that it struck one note at a time. No one's feelings were as strong as Mr. Spivey's. "It's evil and it's dangerous," he told everyone who would listen. "We'll all be sorry if this thing stays among us." As days went by, the broom seemed as innocent and hardworking as ever. Though it had learned how to do many things, sweeping brought it special pleasure. It was, after all, a broom. Occasionally, when there was nothing left to do in the widow's house, it would hop down to the road that separated Minna Shaw's and the Spivey's farms. The road was dirt, of course, and the broom could amuse itself for hours. One afternoon, 2 of the Spivey boys and their dog walked along the road where the broom was happily at work. When they saw what it was doing, they kicked the small stones the broom had swept aside back into its path. The broom ignored them and shuffled off to sweep another part of the road. But the Spivey boys would not leave it alone. They called the broom names. When it continued to ignore them, they picked up a couple of sticks and started tapping the broom's handle. Finally, it stopped sweeping. The broom turned to the 2 boys and knocked them both on the head so hard they fell to the ground in tears. The broom hopped off, but the Spivey dog ran after it, yapping and biting its bristles. "Get him!" the boys yelled. The little dog leaped into the air and caught the broom by the handle, but he was not there for long. That evening, Mr. Spivey drove his wagon up to the widow's house. He was not alone. 3 men from neighboring farms were in the wagon, along with a long wooden stake and coils of rope. Mr. Spivey knocked loudly. When she opened her door, Minna was frightened by what she saw. "We've come for the broom," her neighbor told her. "It's beaten my sons and likely done worse to my dog. The poor animal was nowhere to be found." The widow could tell by their faces that the men would not be leaving without her broom. There was nothing she could do to stop them. For a moment she stood silently, then answered, "Of course, you are right. If it could do such a thing, we must get rid of it." She led the men into her kitchen. "It sleeps in here," she whispered, pointing to a closet. "If you move it carefully, it will not wake up." The men knew how strong the broom was and hoped the widow was right. They opened the closet door, revealing the slumbering broom. One of the farmers took it out and gently held it against the stake while the others wrapped it in yards of rope. They carried the broom outside, drove the stake into the ground, and gathered straw around it. Mr. Spivey lit the fire. In no time, flames turned the broom to ashes. Life soon returned to normal after the widow's farm. The Spiveys even found their dog, healthy but hungry, caught in the branches of a tall spruce tree. Then one morning, Minna Shaw called on her neighbors with frightening news. She had seen the ghost of the broom. It was as white as snow and moved through the woods at night carrying an axe. Mr. Spivey did not believe her, but that night, under a full moon, he watched from a window as the broom's white ghost came out of the woods and slowly circled his house. The next night it returned, circling even closer, and the night after it came again, tapping the axe lightly on the Spivey's door. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Spivey packed their dearest possessions and 8 children into their wagon. Mr. Spivey tried to convince the widow to leave with them, but she chose to stay behind in her little farmhouse. She went down to the road as the wagon pulled away and waved goodbye to her neighbors. "You're a brave woman," Mr. Spivey called out. That evening, the widow fell asleep in her chair by the fire. She'd been listening to music. Simple tunes played one note at a time on the piano. A gentle tap on the shoulder woke her. She looked up and smiled at the broom. Not a ghost at all, but still covered with the coat of white paint she'd given it. "You play so nicely," Minna Shaw said. The broom bowed, put a log on the fire, and played another tune. The end. So I'm going to show you some illustrations up close, and I think you'll be able to see those tiny little dimple marks like I told you. And when he uses this technique in this particular book, it really does set the mood because he's using a dark pencil, and it does make it look really mysterious or moody. And here are the pumpkins. Those are fun. So, what do you think was the object? How did Chris Van Allsburg use anthropomorphism with one of the objects in this book? Did you guess what that object was? Turning a normal object into a live thing? You're right. It was the broom. Now, what object do you think Chris Van Allsburg puts into every single one of his books? Did you guess? Do you have an idea? I'm trying to find it here. It's on this page. So this is Fritz. And Chris Van Allsburg uses Fritz as an object he places in every single one of his stories. So here's Fritz here. And now I like to go back into the library and find some of Chris Van Allsburg's books and look for Fritz in his stories. It's kind of a fun thing about him. So now you know one of my favorite children's authors. And now you know a little bit about me, that I love to read, and we're going to get to know each other. And I'm really looking forward to Zooming with you in the next couple days, and you'll be able to introduce yourself to me. So I want you to think about something that you want me to know about you, because we're going to be together for a while. And like Mrs. Taylor said, we're going to build close relationships, because that's the only way that we're going to help each other learn. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to my story, and have a great day.